And I really want to get to the scenes where George sees what life would have been like if he had never been born. But first, I feel like I should give a rundown of the other actors in the movie. Thomas Mitchell as George's Uncle Billy. The character is clumsy. I wouldn't say stupid, but he makes a lot of big mistakes and he misplaces the money and he doesn't know what to do. And there's a scene where George yells at him, calling him an old fool, I think, stupid. And Billy, feeling like he's ruined everything, just cries hard, and it's one of those crying scenes that just hits you. Then there's Beulah Bondi, Beulah, and then Bondi, as George's mother, Mrs. Bailey, who is a good, supportive mother. Feels like he should not feel so bad about himself, and despite being limited to what he can do, try to have a life. And then these are the two biggest supporting characters in It's a Wonderful Life, and I'm totally serious when I say who these characters are. Ward Bond, a frequent John Wayne collaborator and good friend of the Duke, as Bert, and Frank Phelan as Ernie. So yeah, It's a Wonderful Life has two characters named Bert and Ernie. And I don't know if this is the true inspiration, but it's rumored that the Bert and Ernie characters on Sesame Street were named after these two characters in It's a Wonderful Life. And Bert, played by Ward Bond, is the, I guess, main cop of the town. He's like the only policeman we see in the movie, and he's like a good friend of George. They know each other for many years, and he helps him out every now and then. Not in a corrupt way, but just helps him get places, and he tries to do all he can to help George. He's a good cop, I guess. And Ernie, he's the local cab driver of the town. And I'm not sure if he gives it for free, but he gets George where he wants to go. And Bert and Ernie are, yeah, they're pretty much the main comic relief characters of the film. And the scene where George and Mary have gotten married and they ended up not going on a real honeymoon because the loans office was in danger of being shut down, and there was and everybody would have had to have gone to Mr. Potter for money. So they had to stay behind and keep the business going to help everybody. And Mary willingly gave up the money that was given to them for their honeymoon to give everybody in the town enough money to pay the bills, I guess, and get food until they themselves could get paid at their jobs. George and Mary go to this old rundown house that they had passed many years earlier when they were younger, and even though it's pretty run down and has a leak, they set it up with posters of all the places George always wanted to go, and it's pretty romantic. It's like making do with what you got and still making it something special. And Burr and Ernie stand outside on their wedding night singing a romantic song to them. And satisfied with what they've done, they look at each other smiling, and Ernie gives Bert a kiss on the forehead, and Bert, still smiling, just whacks him on the head. And Frank Phelan plays a nice, caring friend, and Ward Bond plays a tough, will be serious when he wants to be cop, but also has a lot of heart. And then there's this character named Violet, who I guess you could call the town slut. She hits on just about every guy in town, including George, and but in the end, she becomes a very nice character, and we see towards the end it's implied that she is at a bad point, and she comes to George for help at the loans office, and he helps her, and she's very grateful, and she's played by a very controversial actress, Gloria Graham. Grahame. Why is Gloria Graham controversial? Well, look up her love life, look up her marriages, and you'll find out why. She does an okay job. And then there's this character named Mr. Gower, and this is from the beginning of the film when we see George as a child, and I'm not sure how child labor laws were back then. I'm guessing they didn't exist, because George had to have been like 10 in the opening scenes. And we see that he works like as a clerk or a soda jerk at one of those old department stores. And Mr. Gower's his boss. And in the opening, it's established that George saved his younger brother from drowning in a icy pond. And George got a ear infection that made him deaf, I think. No, wait, it was in this ear. Made him deaf in one ear. And his boss is in tears and very drunk, and he's yelling at him. And George sees a note saying that his boss's son had died. And Mr. Gower tells him to deliver some medicine. And he accidentally puts some, I think, rat poison or some kind of poison in a pill capsule into this medicine box. And when George doesn't deliver it, Mr. Gower hits him, yelling at him for messing up, or not doing what he was told, and he's still very emotionally distraught. And this is a hard scene to watch, because he's whacking a kid right in his deaf ear, hurting him, and then the kid crying begs him not to and shows him that it's what it really was. And Gower, I guess, it's like that one moment that will suddenly just sober you up, is horrified at what almost happened and what he's done, and he says he's sorry, and he cries as he hugs little George. And over the years we see them as adults, and we see that they're still very close. They still keep in touch, and I think you could say that he's like an older friend to him. The actor who played Mr. Gower is H.B. Warner. Does a very good job. And then there's Todd Carnes as Harry Bailey, George's brother. Not much to say other than he does a good job playing the younger, thinking kind of himself, but still loves his older brother type character. Samuel S. Hinds as George's father. Like I said earlier, he plays a great father character, and people who have had good relationships with their father will like this scene and feel sorry when the character dies. Frank Albertson as Sam Wainwright. He's another comedic character, I guess. He's obnoxious, but lovable. He cares about his friends. Even though Mary goes with George, he still cares about them. He has this weird habit of going, hey haw, whenever he sees somebody that he hasn't seen in a while, or he'll add hey haw at the end of every other sentence. It's a little annoying, but not too bad. And then there's this character named Annie, played by Lillian Randolph. Annie is the Bailey's maid when George is growing up, and the character is black, and yes, it's a black maid character in a black and white film from the 1940s. But the character, although not huge, I think this is a good character because she doesn't have any real negative character aspects, no bad stereotypes of the times, and she doesn't have any making the black people look like dumb niggers dialogue that most black characters in those movies back then were given. The character is small, but she's well written, and from what I can see, the family really likes her and they all get along. She jokes with them, and even she helps out at the end of the film when George is in trouble. And she's also involved in the big dramatic scene between George and his father, and she contributes very nicely. And lastly, before I finally talk about what I really want to talk about, the Bailey children, all to George and Mary. Carol Coombs as Janie Bailey, Larry Sims as Pete Bailey, and Jimmy Hawkins as Tommy Bailey, and Caroline Grimes as Zuzu Bailey. Yes, they have a kid named Zuzu. I don't know, it was the fucking 40s. And instead of judging individually, I'm just gonna judge them all right now. One, like the actors who played Little George and Little Mary, all these kid actors do a fucking fantastic job. They all seem like real kids, some of them annoying, some of them well behaved, some of them bratty, but all of them loving their parents, and all of them concerned for their parents, and if they are yelled at or spoken to firmly, they don't know what to do, and they have no idea what the problem is. All in all, everyone in this cast is fucking great. Everyone did a great job. I cannot express it enough. And now, on to the big final act of It's a Wonderful Life. After George has gone to Mr. Potter after he can't find the $8,000. This is just a quick artistic aspect I want to mention. Whenever George is in Mr. Potter's office, and I assume whenever someone else is, like Mr. Potter's a pretty big man, pretty fat man in a wheelchair, and anyone who sits across from his desk, the chair on the other side is very low to the ground. So George's head barely reaches the desk. This is a good design choice because it shows, yeah, Potter does this so he looks down on everybody who sits across from him or they look up to him. Pretty good. But anyway, George doesn't know what to do, and he's in a bar and crying, and this is a scene that everybody has pointed out as being one of the best acting scenes by James Stewart, where the character cries and he prays to God, saying he doesn't know what to do, and then he leaves the bar very drunk, and he crashes his car, and then he goes to this bridge where there's a snowstorm going on, and looking into the water, he considers jumping off and dying so that his life insurance can save the business and his family. And then all of a sudden, Clarence, played by Henry Travers, appears. And a funny thing, even though the character Clarence is a most well-known and big part of It's a Wonderful Life, the character does not appear until the last 30 minutes of the movie. Yeah, and the character jumps into the river, and George, out of his good nature, saves him. And Clarence, he's a pretty goofy character, pretty gullible, as the opening scene with the angels and God says. He tries to convince George that this is not the answer. And when George looks at him, and when Clarence says he's an angel, George and this other guy who's around, their reaction, especially the other guy, the reactions are priceless. And George, looking at him, says, like, Clarence is like kind of short, little overweight, and looks like a little old man. And George, staring at him, says, "Well, you look like the type of angel I'd get." And when Clarence decides to show George what life would have been like if he had never been born, all of a sudden the door to the building they're in blows open with loud wind, and Clarence, looking up at the sky, says, "You don't have to react like that." George suddenly realizes some things that don't make sense. For example, when Clarence talks to him, George can hear him very clearly in his deaf ear. And a cut on his lip that he got earlier is no longer there. And George, not believing him at first, just goes into town, brings Clarence along, and they go to this bar owned by a friend. And while inside, all the people that George has known his whole life don't recognize him, and in fact, most of them are not nice people anymore. And while in the bar, his old boss, Mr. Gower, comes in, and the people in the bar react pretty hostile to him. And when George asks what's wrong, the owner says, "That guy went to 20 years for poisoning some kid." See what they did there? Yeah, like It's a Wonderful Life, despite being probably the most well-known Christmas movie ever made, it does not have Christmas as part of the plot until around the 80-minute mark, and the whole showing George what life would have been like without him part, that doesn't come in until literally the last half hour. And something else, next to this movie being a great comedy and a great drama both at the same time, the alternate reality scenes, they are actually pretty unnerving. The music for these scenes and James Stewart's acting as George becoming very terrified and scared, confused, and unsure what to think. These scenes are really scary. The most unnerving scene is when George goes to visit his mother, and he's never been born, and when his mother sees him, she acts very hostile. The way he looks afterwards, realizing that his mother doesn't know him and has no recognition. It's just, you have to see this scene to really get how chilling it is. But there is still some funny scenes. Is like after the bar scene, Clarence looks at the sky and says, "I think it's working, Joseph." And then he's like, "No, I did not have a drink." That's my favorite. That's my second favorite moment with Clarence. My other favorite is when George goes to his house and finds that it never, since he and Mary never got married, the house is still run down, and Bert and Ernie show up and they think he's crazy and try to take him, and George is like, Bert! Ernie! And, yeah, and when Bert tries to club George, Clarence stops him, and as Bert tries to cuff Clarence, he calls out, Joseph! Joseph! And then he just disappears in the blink of an eye. And Bert, who was wrestling with him, is suddenly wrestling in air. That is funny. He's like, where'd he go? George sees more of the town, and he goes to where he had helped set up some housing areas, and he sees that it's a cemetery. And while there, he finds the next big horrifying realization that because he was never born, he never was able to save the life of his brother when he fell into the ice when they were children. And then he tries to find Mary, and she never found anybody, and the next big horror for him, his wife not knowing him, not loving him, and the fact that they never got married means his children were never born. The whole thing really becomes a scary show near the end. It was handled so extremely well. And then George runs back to the bridge where the whole journey started, and he just prays to Clarence or God, I think. I think to both, and he says, I want to live again. And the moment he says that, because when the whole alternate reality part of the film started, the snowstorm outside stopped. But the moment he says, I want to live again, it starts snowing. And I read this is meant to symbolize that he has come back. And maybe it's melodramatic, but when he is so happy to see he's back and he runs home to his family. If he were to try this again today, it might seem a little cheesy, but it was probably one of the first times people had done a real dramatic scene like this before, with a man realizing he loves his family, and the scene where he comes home to his kids. You really want to cry, and I know everyone has talked about how they cried It's a Wonderful Life, but it is true. Really warms you up all over. It's a great final scene, and at the end where everybody comes in, everybody in the town, and earlier, Mr. Potter had said no one would come to George's help if they found out that he had no money. Well, this final scene is a big fuck you to Mr. Potter, because everyone comes in and they give some money to help. They give whatever they can, and just everybody throws in a piece, and even Annie comes in. Even the people in the town who were originally trying to arrest George before all the money came in, they give some money up. It's just It's a Wonderful Life is wonderful. And earlier, Clarence said to George that whenever a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. I just realized that fucking rhymes. And as he stands there with his family, in this picture, and his little daughter, Zuzu, points at this bell on the tree saying, "Angel gets his wings." And George, in the big pile of cash, spotted a book that has a note from Clarence just for him, and it's just perfect. It's a Wonderful Life. It's an all-time amazing, groundbreaking, heartwarming holiday classic. It is wonderful, and maybe it was redundant to talk about it because I'm pretty sure most people have, but it's a great film, and it's one of the earliest films I ever loved, and these two were some of the earliest films I ever loved, and over the years I came to love more Christmas films, even the most non-traditional, and I don't know what else to say other than it's been an interesting year for me. I've tried something new, reviewing movies online on YouTube, and I'll probably cover this in another vlog, but it's been interesting, and I know I shoot these up way ahead of time, but this is for anyone who will be seeing this as my last Bisexual Movie Buff of the year. I give this movie 9.8 out of fucking 10 stars. It is amazing. It is just, yeah. And I set up a goal for myself this year, and I think for the most part I followed through on most of it to myself, and I tried something new, and I think I did it, and it's just been very interesting, and there's still parts of me that don't feel fully great, but I feel like I'm not sure if I'm going to continue this next year, but we'll see, and I really don't know what else to say other than Merry Christmas.